I survived the torture, but those 18 years was no way to live. Like all death row inmates, I was kept in solitary confinement. The total disrespect of human dignity. I lived under the rules of a system that's literally driving men out of their mind. Solitary confinement, it breaks a man's will to live, and he deteriorates right in front of your eyes.
A troubled childhood. Arthur Brown was born on 14 August 1970 in Los Angeles, California. Brown grew up in extreme poverty in a segregated neighborhood of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. His father severely hurt and mistreated his mother physically and emotionally, something no child should have to witness. Drug deal gone bad. Rachel Tovar and her husband Jose were drug dealers in Houston, Texas. They supplied marijuana and cocaine to other drug dealers, including Brown and his associates, who were from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. On June 19, 1992, Brown traveled from Tuscaloosa to Houston, accompanied by Marion Dudley, Antonio Dunson, and Maliek Travis. They arrived at the Houston residence of Brown's sister, Grace, early in the morning on June 20. The culprits had arrived at the residence to buy 3 kilograms of cocaine when they decided to rob them of their drugs and money. 6 people were bound and shot by the trio inside the home. By the time police arrived, 3 victims were already lifeless: Jose Tovar, Jessica Quinones, 7 months pregnant, and Frank Farias. Of the 3 survivors, one, Audrey Brown, later passed away in a hospital, making the total number of victims 4. The remaining 2 survivors identified Marion Dudley, Arthur Brown Jr., and Tony Dunson as their attackers. After the slayings, the perpetrators allegedly fled the area. When it came to light that they were suspects and wanted by the police, they fled town. The trio bought a Jeep Cherokee and convinced 2 women to drive them from Birmingham, Alabama to Louisville, Kentucky. Once there, they purchased plane tickets to Ohio under assumed names. They then left Columbus and headed north. On July 8, 1992, Dudley and Dunson were captured at a mobile home in Fayetteville, North Carolina. On October 23, 1992, Brown was captured by members of the Tuscaloosa County Metro Homicide Unit at an apartment in Northport, Alabama. Trial and tribulations. 3 of Brown's sisters, Cereza Ann Brown, Grace Brown, and Carolyn Momo, testified as witnesses for the state at the guilt-innocence phase. All 3 of them claimed that the police and prosecutors had threatened them in order to coerce their cooperation. Carolyn Momo was held in contempt and incarcerated at one point during the trial for invoking the Fifth Amendment, despite the fact that she had been given immunity. After she eventually testified, she was convicted of perjury. The jury convicted Brown of capital slaying.
Quite frankly, that was not her job. Her job, August of this year. Judge Cornelio disagreed with us. She also disagreed with us that he could have been executed in November. We believe was to have signed the first execution order.
The defense also presented the testimony of a law professor that convicted incarcerated offenders become less violent as they age. The jury answered affirmatively the special punishment issues on future danger and whether Brown actually caused the passings, intended to slay the victims, or anticipated that human life would be taken. The trial court finally sentenced Brown to his end. Arthur Squirt Brown Jr. was convicted of capital slaying, and in November 1993, he was sentenced to the mighty gallows. Marion Butler Dudley was also convicted of capital slaying and was the second of the 3 perpetrators to be convicted. On January 23, 1995, he was sentenced to the gallows as well. Lastly, Antonio Lamone Dunson, too, was convicted and given a life sentence. As of May 2022, he was still in prison and is eligible for parole on July 8, 2027. A sorry end. Dudley was executed by lethal injection on January 25, 2006 in Huntsville, Texas. He became the first person to be executed by the state of Texas in 2006. Dudley refused to walk to the execution chamber and had to be carried. When asked if he had a final statement to make, he ignored the warden and kept his eyes shut. Taken as a decline, the drugs were administered, and 8 minutes later, at 6:16 p.m., he was pronounced lifeless. He had proclaimed his innocence to the very end and denied ever being at the home when the shootings occurred. Arthur Brown is still fighting. Brown has repeatedly attempted to appeal his conviction. In August 2014, Brown lost a federal court appeal after arguing he should be provided $7,500 to pay for a mitigation specialist to assist him with his clemency petition. A federal district court refused, and the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the lower court's rejection. In October 2017, Brown lost another appeal when the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied him a new trial or new sentencing phase.
Keith, state prosecutors say Arthur Brown Jr. could have been sentenced to death. Today, on the third attempt, we now know Brown's execution date. Had the judge signed their initial execution order that they brought before her.
In April 2022, a judge in the 351st District Court was expected to sign Brown's slaying warrant, who had exhausted all of his appeals. In May 2022, prosecutors and defense attorneys attempted to sway a Harris County judge to decide on Brown's finality warrant. Prosecutors attempted to sway the judge to set an August 31 execution date for Brown, while his lawyers argued he had an intellectual disability and was therefore ineligible for execution. On May 20, the judge declined to sign the warrant for Brown, prompting an angry reaction from family members of the victims. Following the verdict, a Harris County District Attorney's prosecutor announced they would challenge the judge's decision through the Court of Appeals.
She did sign, but we have to wait until next year, and most of the time appeal in, and it'll continue like it has for 30 years.
Awaiting execution. It's been many years since Texas attempted 2 executions in the span of 3 days, but the state will attempt to do that next week. Without court intervention, Gary Green will be put to sleep March 7 and Arthur Brown 2 days later on March 9. Since entering the row 30 years ago, Brown has lived quietly with no record of violence. He is a model prisoner who has not given any grief to either fellow prisoners or the authorities. He has the support of Anthony Graves, a former row inmate who was exonerated in 2010 and whose remarks at Saturday's annual meeting of the Texas Coalition to Abolish the Penalty riveted the audience. Graves is asking the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles to reduce Brown's sentence to life without parole. Graves wrote in a letter to the board, reflecting on the friendship he shared with Brown during 12 years on the row. On 1 March 2023, Brown's attorneys have submitted the latest appeal against his execution. According to them, his conviction was obtained using false evidence. His newly appointed attorneys have just discovered that the district attorney suppressed exculpatory evidence showing that other people committed the slaying. Though Brown may have received a reprieve from the hangman's noose, it is still right there hanging over his head like the sword of Damocles, the opposition. Even with his execution date set so close by, many still believe that Arthur Brown Jr. is a man who has been wrongfully convicted. Opposition states that his conviction was obtained using false evidence. His newly appointed attorneys have allegedly recently discovered that the district attorney suppressed exculpatory evidence showing that other people committed the slaying. Mr. Brown also shows signs of having intellectual impairments, including possible fetal alcohol disorder, impairments that made him even more vulnerable to the injustice of this wrongful conviction. Increasing the inhumanity of Mr. Brown's conviction is the fact that his jury never heard mitigating evidence of the hardships he experienced as a child, including abject poverty, neglect, and severe hurt. That's all for this video, folks. See you another time.